Welcome to the Atheist Agnostic Christian Round Table.
I'm Puck.
So enthusiastic. All right, so check it out. We're going to bring on our guest in a moment. And Puck, our last individual has just joined. I think we got a great mix for you. So Puck, I'm going to pass the torch to you. I'm going to get off screen, and you can take over.
The torch has been passed, and I have absolutely no idea what to do with it. So with no further ado, let's bring on the panelists. Let's see what we got. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Welcome, everybody, to this week's roundtable.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be talking about better conversations and dialogue between our two sides. So let's take a moment to introduce ourselves, starting to my right, Dr. Josh.
Joshua Bowen. I run Digital Hammurabi with my wife, Megan, who is a Christian, and I'm an agnostic. I was an evangelical Christian for about 27 years. So agnostic now.
And let's keep going clockwise, Jenna.
Hello, I'm Jenna Belk, and I have a podcast called Atheistasis on my channel, Jenna Belk, where I'm talking about things kind of like this, where I'm trying to learn about the world after losing religion and losing that kind of foundation. So if you're interested, check it out. And I'm also on AXP like once or twice a month, sometimes on Sundays, 4:30 p.m. Central live.
And Craig?
Hi, my name is Craig Reed, and I have a YouTube channel called Craig Reed TCR. I've been doing a kind of makeshift Christian apologetics for about 3 or 4 years on Twitter and YouTube. And as I was telling Jenna, I believe I'm the only Christian who has ever guest hosted a show on the ACA. So on the what is it? What does ACA stand for?
The Atheist Community of Austin.
Atheist Community of Austin. That's right. I believe I'm the only Christian who's ever guest hosted a show on that organization. So, and that's my deal.
Thank you, Dan.
My name's Dan. I have hosted the Dear Christians podcast for about a year now, and I have a master's in ministry. I'm a Christian, former pastor and youth pastor, and work in IT now. But the podcast that I have started tends to be the kind of podcast that agitates a lot of Christians. So we'll see how this goes.
And Rick.
Hey there, everyone. Rick Lockhart, co-host of In Black and White on YFNA News. I guess I would identify as Christian, but probably somewhere along the lines of controversial, depending upon how you look at Christianity. Being that I also identify with the LGBTQ community. I'm also co-host of a show called Color Full Circle with Rick and Al, my fiance, where we talk about things that impact our communities that we identify, including being Black, gay, or Christian, and find full circle resources for them.
So when we were first coming up with ideas for these roundtables, one of the things we wanted to do and wanted to make sure that we touched on was how to have better conversations with people who have opposing or different beliefs. And I just like you guys, I'm sure, I've listened to a lot of different conversations that seem to just go absolutely nowhere. And it seems to hit a dead end. And the two sides just sometimes they don't even seem like they're talking about the same thing. So before we get too far into that, though, and trying to find solutions for this, can we go around one more time? Can you give an idea of how the kind of conversations you have and the kind of exposure you have to talking to people from the other side? Like for me, for instance, I have a show, What the Puck, and I am trying to look for more theists to come on and teach me about things that I would like to know a little bit more about. I had Caleb, the dry apologist, on to explain objective morality, for example. I'd love to have more guests like that. And this is actually the only real interaction that I have with Christians. I'd love to have more. Rick, let's go in the reverse order this time. What kind of spheres do you usually have conversations with atheists?
Well, I'll say that the most conversation I've really had around atheism would be with Ethan. As well as one of our co-hosts from one of our sister shows, Cynthia McDonald, regarding atheism. I wouldn't say that I'm exposed to quite a bit of conversation. I've also kind of watched some of the shows, but that's really the bulk of my extent of conversation.
Dan?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree through my podcast, but a lot of the conversations I've had specifically with people who identify as atheist or agnostic, it's just one-on-one personal relationships that I have, whether it's coworkers or classmates or former classmates, friends from childhood. A lot of it tends to be on social media now, which is kind of disappointing. I wish it could be more in person. But that's not to say that I don't have in-person conversations, because I do, quite a few of them actually. I personally think if you're a Christian and you don't know anybody that isn't a Christian, you're not really doing the Christian thing very well at all. So, so that would be my take on that.
How about you, Craig?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. When I first started on Twitter, I was kind of shocked at how bad the dialogue was between Christians and atheists. Like, I couldn't believe it. And what I did was different. I started having atheists on my channel and interviewing them. And it kind of became my stock and trade. I have really non-defensive, like really good, long conversations. You know, a lot of the big name atheists have come on my channel, like Seth Andrews, Paula Gia, who I call the greatest atheist of all time, Shannon Q. And I just started doing a totally different approach that kind of, actually Dr. Josh I interviewed on my channel too, as him and his wife. That was really fun. And, you know, hopefully Puck, you, Ethan, and Jenna will come and do the same thing. But I became kind of known for having really like open-ended, you know, easygoing conversations where if you talk to any of them, they don't feel defensive at all. It was more just finding out about their position and, you know, trying to see where they were at. And there wasn't really anybody doing that when I first came on. Now there's this kind of God is gray girl who does it, and there's more people doing it. But as far as I know, there was nobody doing that when I started.
All right, Jenna?
I get to talk to whoever calls into the atheist experience, which is a lot of fun. So I don't try to like shut people down. I actually try to understand where people are coming from. So I've interviewed one person that's a Christian for my own show, and I'd like to interview a few more. But I want to do more stuff like this. I want to learn how to have these conversations, but I don't know. Several of my best friends are Christian. I'm basically almost everyone I know is still religious, except for the people that I met through the ACA.
And Dr. Josh?
Yeah, I mean, our channel is educational, so we do a lot of ancient Near Eastern stuff and stuff with the Hebrew Bible, which is, you know, my background and Megan's background. But so we don't really engage on that level on the channel. But I'm a co-host on one of Craig Reed's favorite channels, the Scholar Fiction Show, and yes. You know, it's where apologetics comes to die. So. That's the tagline there. So Skylar and I kind of have this good cop, bad cop routine that we do. And it's not really a routine. It's actually, I think, reality. So Skylar's very, he's amazing at what he does. And I think I kind of come in and a little more timidly and softer, more softly. But yeah, so, you know, we bring a lot of theists on. Both of us are, you know, previous evangelical Christians, so I feel like we have some understanding of the background. But yeah, I think in the end, they end up being often good conversations that aren't. They end up being good conversations. So,
you know, Dr. Josh, when I first started paying attention to the atheist YouTube sphere, you can't get very far into there without running into a Skylar fiction debate, right? And this is like one of those things I'm talking about. How many Skylar fiction debates have you seen where it just seems like they're not even talking about the same thing at all? And so one of the things that I want to ask you is, and I want this to be a lot more freeform than this, because honestly, I have no idea how to call people out one by one and keep it fair. So chime in where you want to and throw yourself in there. So let's start by saying what makes for a bad conversation. So what's something that you might hear from someone on the other or any side really that just makes you instantly say, okay, you know what, I'm done. There's no getting through anymore. This is not going to be a productive conversation. What's some of your triggers for saying, okay, enough's enough?
I hate when people tell me that I'll get there.
That's really condescending.
Yeah.
That's awful. Yeah, that would be annoying. I think for me, the thing that bothers me a lot is when there's no... Oh, Who's talking? Rick, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
So I think one of the things for me that is one of those triggers, I think, is basically even if it's somebody that shares the same perspective that I do, it's if in the event you're not able to really essentially see eye to eye and the fact that there are two different perspectives, right? And understand that there are two different perspectives. Then that's like the baseline of not being able to continue on in a conversation that's going to yield any type of progress. If we can't understand that you have a perspective and I have a perspective and then go from there, then there's really no point of engaging in any further conversation.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that for me is when at the very beginning, you have a hard time coming to agreement on exactly what certain terms mean in the conversation. That makes it really hard. When we're talking about like atheism and Christianity, for example, and we start having a conversation about science and the value of science and the importance of science, I've had conversations with Christians that are very, very anti-science. And I've had conversations with atheists that were very, very anti-theology. And I'm this weird kind of person in the middle who thinks that there are people who can have a theology that can also practice good science if they know how. And it's hard to come to an agreement with either side of that conversation if nobody's able to agree on both of those 2 points for me. So that makes it frustrating. And I basically just be like, well, there's no point in continuing this conversation if we can't come to an agreement on certain terms of the conversation, So,
it's also,
go ahead.
I was going to say, it's also with me, I notice it's the person usually, because there's a certain group of atheists who I'm always bringing up on my channel. The people I mentioned, for example, Shannon, actually Jenna too, I've noticed that on Atheist Experience, who are more, their approach, you two, Puck and Ethan and Dr. Josh as well, their approach is more, they're not in the business of just trying to shut you down, score points, have a debate where they're going to win. There are other types of atheists who that's all they do. And you can't relate. There's no point in even getting into a conversation with them. Yeah. And there's a lot of Christians who do that too. They just see the other side as the opponent, the enemy, the person I'm going to slam them here. And usually if it's on Twitter, 3 tweets in, you know who you're dealing with. I made a lot of friends on Twitter with atheists, but usually about 3 tweets, you'll know. If the guy or girl is just like, trying to bust your chops and not really converse, or if they actually want to have a real conversation.
Well, what I've come to is I said I interviewed a Christian for my show, and he's actually an atheist activist, but he's a Christian. Like, he doesn't believe in like the evangelical stuff, but I don't know. I don't really understand that. But we came to a point where we were talking about how Christians and atheists can get along, and that there's just a point where Christians, and this is in general, believe that it is their job to proselytize, and atheists do not. And I think that's where the biggest overlap of misunderstanding or whatever it is comes from, is because, if I believe that it is your job to leave me alone, and you believe that it is your job to not leave me alone, then that's where we have a problem.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. That's a very good point.
That's
I was going to say
that's one of the things that.
Go ahead, Craig.
Go ahead. I'll just in brief. Yeah, I was going to agree with that. Even if your goal is evangelical, like ultimately mine is, but I think it's a lot more persuasive if you just interact with somebody and whatever seeds you plant with them, you're not really trying to plant it because then they get defensive. You just have a real conversation and try to find out where someone's coming from. That's a lot more evangelical than actually trying to convert somebody, because, an atheist reads that as, okay, here's where I start running my believe in Jesus scam on you, so
yeah.
Go ahead, Josh.
And go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I run into fairly frequently is the sort of, you were never really a Christian, and because of that, you don't have the Spirit of God in you, and so you can't understand these things that are spiritually discerned. And the problem with that, I understand. Again, I was a fundamentalist evangelical Christian for over a quarter century, so like I understand the biblical texts fairly well. So I understand the 1 John 2 position. Like I understand, where they're coming from, and I guess I don't fault them for that position, because from a theological standpoint, it's just it's what you hold to. But it's problematic, I think, because that's it. I have a master's in theology and Old Testament studies. I have a PhD in Assyriology, and I minored in Hebrew Bible. So if I say something about the Old Testament or about the ancient Near East, it doesn't matter in that conversation, because no matter what I say, no matter what scholar I refer to or consensus that I cite, it doesn't matter, because I'm not qualified to speak on a spiritual matter, because I don't have the Spirit of God inside of me to be able to, discern those spiritual truths. And so that can be, it is frustrating to me, I suppose, but I find it to be more sad than anything, because it's like, I feel like, I was just going to say, like, Megan, real quick, Megan is a Christian, right? And we have great conversations. It's like, it's no problem, but that's not a position that she holds. So she doesn't, she can learn from me, and I can learn from her, and it's productive.
See, my big thing has always been assuming you know what the other side is thinking already. And we talk little things like that, like you weren't really a Christian, falls under that also, or
you really do believe.
One. Yeah, another one popular one atheists get is you just are angry with God, or you just want to sin. And you know what? We're just as bad. We're like, you know what? You're a Christian. You have to believe it, or you're not.
I've
really
gotten that.
Have you really?
And that just kind of shuts it down for me. It's like, if you're already trying to tell me what I think, then there's no point in us continuing this conversation. Yeah. And the other thing I really don't like about, like, in debates, whenever I watch them, is I guess I'd like to think that before a debate, there's a lot of conversation that goes on about the topic of a debate. And then they actually come on stage, and it's like any of that prior conversation didn't matter. And they're on there. It's like, okay, well, what did you mean then when you said objective morality or secular humanism? What? And then it turns into this semantics battle, and it's like, we're not even talking about what we came here to talk about. Yeah. Now we're just like nitpicking. And I mean, I agree. It's important to come to terms with or come to agreement about the definitions that you're using, but there's probably a better place to do that than. Like, we're on the air now, okay? People are expecting a conversation. Let's not hash out what does it mean to be a true atheist. Yeah. And oh boy, do I get that a lot too, right? Oh no, that's not an atheist. That's agnostic. It says so here in the Stanford Book of Philosophy or whatever that is. You're not really an atheist, so you can't really talk about atheism. No.
Well,
yeah, please.
Actually, if I can just jump in for a second here, I think the unfortunate part about that is, and you bring up a great point, is when you attack it as, or attach to it the debate piece of it, then you start having those tit for tats back and forth, right? One of the things that I think that I've been a true advocate in regards to having these conversations, it's simply that we can have a conversation, right? It's when we start attaching debates to it that we have to prove a point, that I personally, as to answer your previous question, that's the trigger for me. I'm not up for the debate of this, right? We can have a conversation to understand perspective. We can have a conversation to understand what your experiences have been, what my experiences have been. But if we attach debate to it, just for me personally, I'm not able to continue on in that, because there's no point of it. Everyone see, I'm going to pass a collection plate around.
No, and like I can understand to some extent the purpose of debate and whatnot, and the following the structure of it.
Sure,
and it really does. Yeah,
some people love that. Absolutely love it.
I think we have enough of that.
Yeah, I've had exactly one debate. I'm happy to never do it again.
Totally agree with that.
There's hours and hours and hours. Like, there's
like I won't put energy in debating anti-racism versus non-racism versus racism in general. Like, I'm not going to do that. There are things that just don't need to be debated. When it comes to situations like this, there are conversations that we can have. Debating is just not one of them.
Yeah, Twitter's a horrible place for this too, because you have to put out your entire position in 200 characters or less, and I'd like to think that I'd like to think that formats like this are really nice. We're all sitting here, we all have our various beverages, and we're just having a fun conversation. But like, aside from this, it's like, how do you make these conversations happen? Where can we get together more often and have productive conversations? I mean, Craig's great. He does a lot of invitations. Jenna has these people who keep calling her and saying, I have proof of God. But like, what can we do to what arenas are really good for having productive conversations like this?
I mean,
Personally-
this is the best. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is probably the best forum for these type of conversations, where you just have a channel with, like I'll do this more on my channel, where you get like 2 or 3 people from the other side. This is really how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I have like a lot of people who watch my channel got different sides of even Dr. Josh. Like 2 years ago, they saw his deconversion story in full. Same thing with Apologia. So you get a totally different perspective. You know what I mean? The one thing I was going to say about what Josh was saying is, a lot of times, especially with Josh, who used to be evangelical, or Jenna, who deconverted, I think a lot of Christians act defensively with that. They're like, well, they get really defensive. Like, see, I wasn't raised Christian, so it doesn't bother me at all. It's meaningless to me that he used to be evangelical because I wasn't. So I'm not like, well, how could you have quit the squad? Obviously, you weren't really one of us. So that's where that comes from. You were never really a Christian.
Yeah.
I think more often
the dismissive nature
That's
of
my
all
guess.
of that is, I think, the thing that bothers me the most. And both sides are really guilty of it. I mean, Christians dismiss the opinions of atheists all the time when they start getting especially if it's someone who deconverted. I'd also point out that atheists tend to be extremely dismissive of Christians often, and making assumptions about intelligence and how much they really understand science and how much they really understand the topic. And how could you possibly, there's a dismissive nature that I think often ends up colliding with the very same thing that we're pointing out is the debating side of it, that just is absolutely unproductive in any setting, and when it comes to actually trying to get to know another person. And for either side, and for anybody who's happily in the middle, I feel like getting to understand and know the other person, that should be the goal. Even within Christianity, those who study their Bible well enough know that it's not on you to convert somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, Craig could probably back me up, but this is not the goal of a Christian. We're supposed to go into all the world.
I don't know about
make disciples, right? We've heard that verse a lot, but we're not the ones who are converting anybody. We can have meaningful conversations. We can build relationships. We can have honest discussion about what we think about what God's word says and how that applies to the world around us and how that applies to me, how it changed my life, et cetera, et cetera. Sharing what that impact is for me with other people, yes, that's a part of Christianity. But that's not the same as saying it's my job to convert you and make you change your mind. That's not the job of a Christian at all. And if there are Christians walking around with this idea that it's their job to make converts everywhere they go, they're missing the point, and they're missing ultimately, from a theological perspective, the part that God's supposed to play, the part that the Holy Spirit's supposed to play in that whole process.
So what could I say to somebody that tells me that tells me, no, this is my job. Like, this is what Jesus says I'm supposed to do. What do I say? No, you're wrong.
You're wrong. Yeah. That's
yeah. You say, no, my Christian friend Dan told me it's not your job to talk to you. He'll give you an earful. But honestly,
Craig said you're wrong.
Right, exactly.
You can tell him your Christian friend Rick concurs too. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rick, Dan, and Craig. This is nice. You have 3.
And listen, I have bad credit, so I shouldn't co-sign with anything, but I'll co-sign with something that's not.
If you want to give them a theologically sound response, you could say, I'm pretty sure that's the job of the Holy Spirit, and it's not yours.
That's fair. That's fair, because it is the Holy Spirit that's supposed to ultimately do the job, if I remember correctly.
So it's like, okay, yes, there's aspects of Scripture that say you should be ready to give an account of what you believe and why at any point. Absolutely. You should be ready to articulate that intelligently and meaningfully to people when the opportunity is there, if the opportunity is there. But it's not your job to force someone to get it. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what that's about. And so if they continually keep harping over and over and over, thumping people with the Bible, like it's their job to force all of that theological perspective into their mind, they're not doing Christianity right.
Heard.
So, you know, I just realized I can do this. So I just like to do this really quick because I think it's a good, relevant question. I can do this. So can we take a moment to address Richard Graves' question? I hid all the, like, half of the theists down there, and I apologize. That's just the layout of the stream.
I don't know.
Why can't we have conversations where we simply accept that we differ in the position of belief in deity? I never understood debating the issue. Thank you very much for the layout change there. It's almost like we have someone behind the scenes who's manipulating the layout.
Yes, God. No,
yeah. So
Wait.
Whoever wants to start with this one.
I want to. Dan, can we make that a hashtag? You're not doing Christianity right. Like, I feel like that should be a movement.
I would love that. Yes.
Like, let's parallel
that
to, like,
you're not doing
hashtag,
Christianity right.
You're not doing Christianity right.
I like that. That's a good hashtag.
I'm just saying, it sounded good to me. I'm going to send that to my Christian
You're not
friends.
doing Christianity right.
You're not doing Christianity right.
You heard it here first, folks. Yeah.
You know, I will.
Who wants to take on the question first?
I think I will. I think that the reason that it comes to a debate, and the reason that we can't just get past that, is because there seems to be a debate over whether or not it is factually true, like whether or not there is enough proof, you know? And so some people think, yeah, there's enough proof, and some people think, no, there's not enough proof. And so that's where we're just not ever going to all agree. And so I think that asking that kind of a question is the only way to start getting past that.
I think that, you know, when Skylar and I go on, almost inevitably what happens is, you know, we end up dealing with fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. So this sort of, you know, inerrant view of the scriptures, divine inspiration, that's that hermeneutical approach. And unfortunately, it never ends up being a question of, well, I have faith that God exists and that's sufficient, right? Because once you get to that point, it's great. I mean, again, Megan has faith that God exists and that's sufficient, and I think that's great. What ends up being a problem, though, is somebody says, well, now, you know, if you look at this ancient Near Eastern text, it shows X, right? Or if you look at the, you know, the Hebrew Bible, this verse actually, you know, shows this. Well, at that point, we're not dealing with faith, you know, we're dealing with textual issues, or we're dealing with cultural, historical issues. And I feel like that's something that I'm going to step in and say, okay, well, let's evaluate that claim. So yeah, I think that's why it gets debated, because those are issues that are outside of the realm, I think, of strictly of faith.
That's a good point.
What about the Christian half? What do you guys think?
What's the question? I couldn't
Can you
hear.
put the question up again?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and throw this.
I remember
back
half
up.
of it, but
Here we go.
I don't even from a Christian perspective, I don't think that it differs any from what they explained. I think it's very similar in that there are two sides that want to show proof of their reality being what is, versus just having a conversation around different beliefs. Because, you know, I think I'd like to say at the end of the day, our beliefs are our beliefs, right? None of us have died and come back. Right, so it's not like we have this living proof of.
Well, there was this one guy, but
I mean, because from time to time, there's that, you know, there are moments where they came back, right? So, but you know, I think at the end of the day, it's that we have these beliefs and we want to prove that these beliefs are right, and so it evolves from conversation into debate. But I don't think it's any different than the explanations that were given. I mean, I'm not speaking for all Christians on the panel, so that's just mine.
Yeah.
When I was on recently, I was on T Jump's channel, and he was interviewing me, and actually, I've gotten a lot better at this. Is chiseling it down to there's a lot of common ground between me and an atheist that me and T Jump got to. When he asked me how'd you become a Christian, I said, okay, I went to a church one night and I had a really powerfully convincing experience that I believe was God. And he's like, okay, I can't argue with that. So then we just started covering all the things that we can agree about. And there's a lot, you know, obviously, if he's never had a religious experience like I had, he's not necessarily, I don't expect him to accept my testimony by faith, but so we can't, that's the only bone of contention between us. And that's what I'm doing with that guy, Brett, where we've been having we've had about 4 or 5 streams together now where we cover all the knowable facts between me and the non-believer, because there's tons of stuff that we can actually converse about that we agree on. It's just that most people zero in on the bones of contention between them and get bogged down in like counterproductive conversation. It's just how people are, They jump to like Democrats and Republicans can't converse productively usually either, because they zero in.
That was not entirely 100% right on Ethan's podcast last night. Just throwing that out there.
That was
y'all should check that out.
That was a great video.
Check that.
I can do that too, though. I mean,
but
like,
yes,
you're
totally on point, Craig.
I can hang out with liberals and like dyed-in-the-wool conservatives. My wife is really Republican, and we never disagree, even though we don't agree. Because there's areas where we do agree, and I get where she's coming from, even if I don't. Like with a lot of atheists, I get where they're coming from, particularly with their complaints about religion and the toxicity of religion. Like when Ethan and Puck, when we were talking on Stephanie's channel, there's a lot of stuff that we agree about, when religion is toxic and things like that. I mean, I get it, so there's a lot of stuff that we can converse about where we agree. It's usually people don't really want to do that. They want to like zero in on the bones of contention.
I don't think that there's enough people asking questions. There's a lot of people that just want to explain to everybody what's going on. And it's like, well, I don't know what your experience, I want to hear about this, crazy spiritual experience you felt in church. Like I'd want to hear more about that before I can make any kind of assumption that I have any idea of what happened,
Right.
Yeah, and even on the Christianity side of it too, the exact same thing falls into play. Like Scripture makes it clear we're supposed to be quick to listen, as I bump the mic, quick to listen and slow to speak, right? And slow to getting angry. How many Christians do you know who are willing to engage in a conversation with somebody who thinks differently than them, whether it's theology or politics or whatever, and you would categorize them as being quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to being angry? Not very many. At least in my experience. So that's
y'all are rare.
It's rare, and it shouldn't be, though. For those who are actually diving in and understanding the purpose of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to be an ambassador of heaven, as it's defined, they need to understand how to do their job.
And that's kind of I define myself as a humanist, and so
you're not doing
the same
it right,
thing.
Right? Yeah.
Right, it's the same thing. Like as atheists too, we should care about humans in general.
Right. Well, with in the atheist community, the atheists who are the higher brow, what I call the top shelf atheists, are the people who I get along with really well. They kind of got one eye on that. Like Shannon is always kind of thinking how to make atheism presentable and palatable, not just to preaching to the choir of all the atheists on board. A lot of the atheists who I get along with well are thinking that. They're kind of thinking of themselves as ambassadors. Certainly, objectively, Dan is thinking of himself as like an ambassador for his squad. Not just let me prove everybody.
Let me look that up. Ambassadors. I don't know if that's.
Did I just get called a generic brand atheist? I mean, you have the top shelf atheist. There's like generic vodka that you use for like cheap martinis.
Bottom of the barrel atheist.
I mean, wow.
Mad Dog.
Somewhere in the middle grade.
Fortified wine atheist. No, I wasn't talking about you specifically, Pug. Necessarily.
I'm very curious about this. What do you think is something that you think the other side, and I don't mean to like make us opponents or anything, but you know what I mean when I say,
oh, here we go.
We're gonna put words in each other's mouths and it's turned out great.
That's how it
this is my first round table. Okay, guys, this is like,
Puck, I love you more and more with every minute this podcast. You're the exact kind of guest that I like to have on my show.
So what do you think is one thing that the other side just, a majority of them, or you keep on running into the same interaction, but you wish that they understand, they just keep getting this wrong, and you wish, let's just take care of this right now. Now that we have 6 of us that are speaking about this, what's something that you wish the other side just understood better about your position?
Oh God, can I go
Go
with
for it.
what I wish my side understood more about the position?
I was
Yeah,
going
we'd like
to say,
to,
I would
please.
probably be able to understand and explain that a little better. But
Oh, this is awesome. It's like we're picking on both sides here.
go
This is
for it,
nice.
Rick. Go for it.
Like so for the longest time, and this is something that I think I had to discover as accepting the person who I am as a gay black man. There is, and growing up as Christian, from Catholic to Baptist to non-denominational, and all different variations and denominations of Christianity, that Christianity to me has just simply been incorrectly taught. And if in the event we're going off of the basis of trying to teach people and trying to debate on how the Christian side is the right side, if we're doing it from a basis of using scriptural texts and historical accounts and so on and so forth, then it's never going to be a winning position, because you're always going to have opposition to that, right? If we were just simply going off of the basis of, as we talked about earlier, doing Christianity right, all I'm supposed to do is show love and love people, and or as many atheists would call, just being a humanitarianism, right? That being the basis of Christianity, then maybe we can get a little bit further in our conversations and discussions. So I think I typically have this conversation with some of my friends who identify as Christian. I'm grateful to actually have a church community where we all believe that. But I think at the end of the day, if we're teaching from the wrong basis, then as Christians, if we're explaining, explaining from the wrong basis and attempting to use scripture texts and historical accounts and so on and so forth to prove our basis, then it's going to fall on brick walls and deaf ears.
I'd say, so I had a conversation with a girlfriend of mine not long ago, and I wanted her to be a guest on my show with all of the George Floyd protests going on. I wanted to kind of get her voice out there and see what she had to say. And she's like, oh, I'm not about that negativity. I was like, well, what do you mean negativity? She was like, isn't it an atheist show? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, doesn't that mean it's negative and it's just like bashing Christianity? I was like, no. So that's one thing that I wish that Christians knew, is that just because it's atheist doesn't mean it's negative, doesn't mean it's, vulgar, doesn't mean that it's harmful or evil or angry or all of these things. Like maybe it used to be, I don't know, but at least now there are more things out here, out in the world. There are more shows, more perspectives that show that we're actually just people.
Yeah, there were a lot fewer drunken orgies on the atheist side than I was led to believe when I was a Christian. It's really not that.
Puck, were you looking for that? Was that something that you?
Yeah, I gotta admit, it was a selling point.
It sounds like Rick knows where to go.
That's the dark web, Puck.
Depending on what you're looking for, though, be careful.
Below the radar
my groups
stuff
of friends.
Puck, don't sound so obviously disappointed.
Wasn't he?
It's a lot less.
It's like, where's all the debauchery? I was led to believe there would be debauchery. Where do I find this? I don't know.
Exactly. I would have been like, sign me up. Sign me up.
I probably have found a lot of it in Christianity too. So pick your poison. Whichever one you want.
What do you think about all this, Dr. Josh? What do you think is one of the biggest misunderstandings?
Yeah, I mean, sort of to piggyback a little bit on what Rick said, I think there's this, again, most of the time I feel like I'm engaging with people that are fundamentalist. And because of that, there's this conclusion that they come to the discussion with, that the Bible is the inerrant and inspired word of God. And so, I get Ezekiel 26 thrown at me a lot, right? Look at this fulfilled prophecy of the city of Tyre. And it's like, okay, well, that's problematic. Or, any of these other prophetic texts. And I understand the position, but I don't think that, I feel like I know reasonably well that Christianity, you don't need that to adhere to Christianity. You don't need, the book of Daniel to be written in the 6th century in order for Jesus to be the Son of God. You don't need Isaiah 53 in the mind of the writer of, 3rd Isaiah second Isaiah, to have been prophesying in his mind about the coming Messiah or Isaiah 7:14 or any of these other passages that are like these key prophetic passages. It doesn't need to be that way. It's okay that the gospel writers aren't actually Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? Those things are not necessary in order for someone to hold to the Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, in my opinion, so if you can get to that stage where you can say, okay, maybe the conquest account doesn't have to actually match the archaeological record, right? Maybe we don't have a destruction at Jericho or a destruction at Ai. We don't have those things. Israel wasn't this outside force coming in the 15th century or late 15th century. Then these arguments, a lot of them just sort of fall by the wayside.
They disappear. Yeah, that's a lot of things I talk about on my channel with those Old Testament arguments. If you don't hold hard and fast to the inerrancy position, most of the arguments from the atheist or the secular point of view are arguing against inerrancy. They're not necessarily relevant to the ontology of whether God exists or not.
Exactly.
They're only about inerrancy. So if you're and you can even, I got to figure out a way to say this right, but you could even be somewhat inerrant in a much looser, I don't know, maybe Dr. Josh knows what I'm trying to say. You can hold to a kind of inerrancy that's much looser, that you don't have to be so defensive about, like, things that just might not be true. That's really, because that's part of why Dr. Josh deconverted. If you listen to his story, they were telling him these sacred cows, like, if you ever find out X is wrong, the whole thing falls apart. And that actually segues right into my biggest complaint is that there's a lot of atheists who have deconverted for that reason. They were told, if you ever find out X is wrong, the earth is 6,000 years, isn't 6,000 years old, then the whole thing is false. Now, I wasn't raised to believe in the Bible at all. So to me, these weren't even like real issues or questions. You know what I'm saying? So like those debates are meaningless to me, and they could be for a lot of people too, as Dr. Josh just pointed out. I think what I said made sense.
Congratulations too, Craig. But
I followed it.
Yeah,
I followed it.
I think I have to be reliant on the Bible. Congratulations that you didn't grow up in that Christian world, dear Lord.
Yeah, I kind of piggybacking off of what you said, Craig. I feel like the core of what it means for me to be a Christian means that I'm called to be a disciple of Jesus specifically. Yes. So there is some aspects of understanding what is in the Old Testament and how it connects to Jesus and how it connects to and builds up to theologically the reason why Jesus had come. So there's definitely some value for sure in understanding the Old Testament and how it connects with everything that Jesus came to do in the New Testament for all of us. But at the end of the day, the real question for me in my mind of whether or not I am committed to being a Christian is, do I have a problem with Jesus? Like, at the core, is there anything about Jesus and what he taught and what he explained and how he lived and how he challenged people to live that I have a huge problem with? And there isn't. There's a lot of problems I have with Christians who have said that they follow Jesus, and they have all kinds of crazy ideas of what they think Scripture says. Often ends up getting merged with politics way too much, and that's a whole nother conversation that I get pissed off about a lot. But it's not about politics. It's not about cultural whatever. It's about Jesus. That's what it comes down to foundationally for me. And so one of the biggest problems that I have when atheists are coming to me is they start having a conversation with me, trying to debate and argue all of that Old Testament stuff. And I'm like, no, you got to understand, for me as a follower of Jesus, that's who it's all about. That's who it's all about. So if you want to have a conversation with me about my theology, understand Jesus is going to be wrapped around every part of it. Like, that's the conversation where it's always going to land with me. And they don't like to have that conversation because on the whole, Jesus said some pretty cool stuff that a lot of people are pretty cool with. So Yeah, I don't know if that made any sense.
There are a lot of atheists who will say that, who go like, I've got no real problem with Jesus, or at least aspects of what Jesus teaches. It's like Dr. Josh. It's like how Laura Robinson reconciles it. I'm not exactly sure. I'd love to hear her spell it out. But her and a couple of the people who she's been, like that Ian Mills guy, they define themselves as Christian. I'm pretty sure they don't struggle over these things at all, right?
Yep.
So how does she reconcile? Did you ever hear her vocalize it? Because I'd love to hear her say that.
Yeah, I mean,
it's never an issue for me, but I understand that it's an issue for a lot of people because they're raised to like, this is sacrosanct. If you let this go, everything falls, because that's what you were taught, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably at its core the issue is that, I remember asking her actually a couple months ago, do you think that Jesus actually rose from the dead? Like if I had a camcorder back there, and she said, I'm not sure. I'm not saying that we wouldn't see that, but I don't know that she, and I hope I'm not misquoting her here because my memory is not that great, but it wasn't like, oh yeah, absolutely, we'd catch it on camcorder. But that doesn't bother her, right? That's not relevant, because I think it's the implication from a theological standpoint is different. And I just maybe at its, and then I'll be quiet. But I mean, basically, if we can just understand that there are more ways to look at the biblical text than just, this historical grammatical hermeneutic that says this is an inerrant inspired text down to the, to the very grammatical forms. That God can use a text, should he exist, he can use a text however he damn well pleases. So
right, it doesn't have to be 100 or 0. There's a middle ground there where you can get a lot out of it. I mean, with me, it's not an issue because that's how I read a lot of things. Fiction, literature, music. There are aspects of secular things that I consider spiritual. So it was never really anything I struggled with. But I understand that it's a big struggle for a lot of people.
Hey,
well, we're
Chris?
coming up on the 50-minute mark here. I want to give anybody in the audience, we sadly just got a flood of people, so I'm guessing Neil the 604 Atheist's Wednesday night show just ended, and they all came over here. But I wanted to open this up.
Hi, everybody.
Right.
Welcome.
Yeah, I wanted to open up for the audience. Go ahead and drop any questions over there. Our wonderful producer behind the scenes will aggregate those questions and give it to the panel if you have any. But I wanted to go one last round here, and I wanted you guys to give 2 pieces of advice. First of all, to anybody who might be listening who wants to have better conversations about religion or about theology or about their life as a Christian or an atheist, one piece of advice that you'd have for them. And then, as a personal favor, Ethan and I are new at this. All right. You guys are seasoned veterans. We have former pastors. We have people who've been on the internet for a long time. I've been doing this for 2 months. Okay. So what is a good piece of advice for me and Ethan personally for how to have a better channel for having these conversations? Rick, could you start that off for us?
Just as long as I make sure I have your questions correct. So
Okay.
you're looking for 2 points. One, advice for having these types of conversations or having conversations regarding religion and beliefs is one.
Yeah.
Okay.
For our audience, anybody who
For
might
the
be
audience,
watching.
right? And then the other one is for you and Ethan. Good luck.
Us personally.
So
Let us have it, by the way. Okay.
Let's
I am
target
sitting
the
here
folks.
on that little seat, and you throw the baseball and you hit the target, and I get dunked in the water.
If you get dunked in the
there.
water, it's hot here in Chicago. I don't know if you are here, but
Cincinnati, it's about 80 degrees. Go ahead.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Pretty
So
toasty. Yeah.
I think the first point in regard to having conversations around religion or anything that requires or has a sense of stance of belief is understanding that there, like I said before, the basis is understanding that there are 2 different perspectives. And if you can't understand that there are 2 different perspectives, then there's no point of engaging in conversation. Right. I can understand. I'll correlate it to this. I've been this advocate in speaking out about anti-racism and racism in general or systemic injustice. But I can't have that conversation with someone if, one, they don't understand that I have a perspective, as well as if I don't understand that they have a perspective. So if I can't do that, then there's no point of having the conversation any further. So if you're going to engage in the conversation, understand that you're talking to a human being that has a perspective and then go from there. As far as what you guys are doing, keep it up.
Thank you.
Yeah. Love it.
Dan?
Don't be a douchebag.
Hey,
Yeah,
that's
that'll
a
work.
song.
That's
I mean,
start.
a good rule of
that's
thumb.
the easiest way to put it. No, to elaborate maybe a little bit more, because you're probably hopefully wanting more than that. I think kind of building off of Rick's point, the fact that there's different perspectives, I think it's always good to recognize that you can try to understand and empathize with someone's perspective without having to accept it as your own. That's a big part of it. That enables us to have a little bit of empathy in the conversation and hopefully extend a little grace. On top of that, I also think a lot of the conversations regarding religion and atheism and a lot of that stuff ends up getting caught up in issues regarding social justice and politics and civil rights issues, and like just a lot of that kind of stuff that I think is also equally important and valid and valuable. But there's a difference between having a conversation about, like, for example, a Christian's theology and how they're living out that theology personally in their own life versus how we're running our country. Like, and this is something that I think probably applies more to the Christians that are out there listening. And it's one of the things that I end up having the most frustrating conversations with when it comes to other Christians who, for whatever reason, feel like, I don't know, it's like they're wanting to try and advocate for a theocracy, which is the worst possible idea ever. But you can have a conversation with somebody about a political issue and have a conversation about morality and about the moral imperatives that exist in certain aspects without necessarily having to insist that they accept the theology that you're trying to convey. There's a way for you to understand their perspective without having to insist that you agree on all of those points. So that was a lot. I'm sorry. That was...
No, please. That was.
I mean, that was really just don't be a douchebag. That's what that was.
Right. Don't be a douchebag. Don't be a douchebag. And if you are a douchebag, you're not doing Christianity right.
You're not doing Christianity right.
Not totally.
Hashtag.
Just saying. Right.
Dan, we're going to market that, man.
Craig, what do you got for me?
I would say the most important thing in having more is take off your debunk, dismiss, discredit hat. You know, realize that there's a culture.
It's a good one.
And it's
I like the nods.
both
We're all
people-
nodding our heads together.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
both sides do this, and it's a culture that's been built up on Twitter and YouTube. But step apart from the culture of, like, I'm in this to wreck this guy. Don't go in it to wreck this person, shut him down. Yeah, slam him. It's totally counterproductive, particularly if you're a Christian. But if you're an atheist too, it's counterproductive to understanding anything about Christianity or religious people at all. And realize that these conversations are by definition speculative, open-ended, more philosophical. And, you know, that's how I would say for the advice for understanding the other side. And as far as you guys, give it up. No, I'm just kidding. No, you guys are doing it right. You know,
Yeah.
I would agree with you and Puck and Ethan, we could do more of these. You guys can come on my channel, one or both of you, and grab an atheist or two, and we could do a lot of these type of things where, you know, me and Puck and Dr. Josh or Jenna, for example, could do a stream on my channel talking about this again. I think this is the right way to bring understanding, because people watch these things and they go, okay, even just seeing interactions with atheists, even when, like, you see, like, I do a long interview with genetically modified skeptic that's like 2 hours long. You hear his perspective in depth. It's impossible not to humanize the person when you hear somebody talk like that. It just automatically happens. You go, okay, you automatically start to empathize and go, wait a minute. Yeah, he's evil, sort of, but he's kind of a human being too. And, you know, you can't not do that when you have these type of conversations. It just naturally leads to this is the way to do it, basically, is what I'm saying.
I don't know. I like to be as dismissive and insulting as possible in every
I was going to say,
conversation.
right. It was,
Well,
some people are that.
That always goes extremely well. So.
Oh, Jenna, what do you have for us?
Good word, Craig. I like that.
That was great.
Thank you.
I'd say something that I try to remind myself of is that the only thing that I have control over is myself right now. So I have to remind myself that I can't make other people listen to me. I can't make other people want to hear what all that. So I'd say my advice is to stop trying to force other people to do things and work on yourself. And if you have questions, then ask them. That's it.
Yeah.
Oh, and y'all are doing awesome. This is great. I love this.
Thank you. Dr. Josh, what do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is, to sort of go against a little bit of what we've all said here tonight, there is value, I think, in the debate style, and I'll tell you what I mean. I am, I think, to the core, a people pleaser. And so what ends up happening when I talk with people that disagree with me, there's a great example of this conversation that I had with Dr. Michael Brown on the issue of slavery in the Hebrew Bible on Modern Day Debate. And, the whole time, he's such a nice guy, and I feel like I'm probably a nice guy. And we're just, we're trying to find all the places that we agree, which is great. Unfortunately, we didn't end up talking about some of the things that people really wanted to hear about, like how do you handle Leviticus 25, 44 to 46,
Right.
What about that beating the slave passage in Exodus 21? We didn't really dig down into the places that we differ. That was a good conversation. And again, I really like Dr. Brown. But there's a place for a discussion where you're coming in to disagree. See, for me, I feel bad in those types of discussions when I disagree with people, which is, I guess, is not the normal thing. But I don't like doing it. However, if it's billed that way, like, all right, we are coming in here to try to, rumble a little bit, then I feel like it's expected of me to put up a fight. And so then you kind of you dig down into some of the places that you really disagree. So, I mean, obviously that's the major problem I think that we see is, people not empathizing and not listening and not trying to find common ground. So, I mean, certainly we do want to focus on that, but let's not totally dismiss, the place that debate has. This is one of the reasons that I go on with Skylar, is because he is sort of the confrontational side that I don't have. So it allows me to sort of put that information out there without having to be directly, confrontational. So yeah, maybe allowing both aspects on the channel would be a good way to think about it moving forward.
I think it's important to be able to demonstrate that you can have very intense disagreements on issues and listen to one another in the process. Like that has to be demonstrated. I mean, on my podcast, the whole point of me starting it was the fact that I saw so many Christians not demonstrating how to do that, how to actually have a disagreement with somebody or ask or be willing to be asked very, very difficult questions that most people would probably want to avoid talking about, and have an honest conversation that's rooted in actually listening first and then being real with each other. You can do both. And I think that's a great point, that you have to do both. And that's hopefully what the channel is all about. So
I also go ahead.
Well, I just real quick, I want to explore that just a little bit if I can, just because I personally have, and this is something I'm working through my therapist with, I have difficulty with confrontation. So let me ask, if your intention is to engage in that type of discourse, why?
Who are you asking? Are you asking me, Rick, or anybody?
Dan or Dr. Josh, either of the two, because of you will have experience here, and anyone who wants to jump in there. What is the outcome that you're looking to get from having the discourse
versus a conversation, right?
Correct.
I'll actually defend Dr. Josh's point of view, because I do, even though
he's laughing so hard right now. I love that.
even though what happened?
No, you're good. You're good. Craig. Go for it.
The joke's on me. What I do now? What I do?
I love how he was explaining very clearly that he hates confrontation on that direct line. He gets a very direct conversation, and I'm just anyway.
It's true. It's true.
I love it.
But
I love it.
every now and then I'll jump in and
go for it.
You know, I just want to know why.
That's good. That's very good. Anyway, Craig, continue.
Okay, so to defend Dr. Josh, there is even though I'm all about having real conversations with people, and that's what I do on my channel, and I hate debates on my channel, there is a place for debate where you go in formal and you're trying to just win a formal argument, because that's how you chisel away. Like there's the secular utility of religion, for example. I keep pimping this out on my channel that's what Christians should be going out there trying to defend, because it's a defendable position, and then you can actually win an argument so that the argument goes away, so that you actually and that's kind of what Dr. Josh is coming from, because in terms of what he's talking about with slavery in the Old Testament, there's a right and there's a wrong, and the only way to actually get out that at the actual facts of the situation is to kind of have the biggest baddest person on this part of the position face off against the biggest baddest person on that part, but it's got to be like a non-contentious, scholarly type, gentlemanly type thing. It's even there. It can't be just
So I don't think that there's enough debate already. Like we haven't already had all of the conversations we could have.
Yes, I absolutely do. I'm just defending his position in the context of what he meant.
Just curious.
Yes, I totally do. Most of the time, there's a culture of debate, and that's really the problem, because you go on Twitter where it's totally inappropriate, it's totally annoying, or you go on someone's channel. It really threw me when I first was on atheist channels, when they were just trying to debate me the whole time. I was like, dude, this is such a waste of my time. Let me out of this channel. So there's a place for it in a formal debate, a setting. And then there's a time where we should be doing it how Ethan and this guy Puck are trying to do it. I think that's the way to do it, or how they're doing it. And then you go to formal debates.
Thank you.
With people you respect and understand, to try and win points.
The other side of it too, I think for me, that I find is the goal in going into those kind of conversations for myself personally, is to try and shed light on where people's personal biases are, where their confirmation biases are, and be able to have reflective moments for yourself personally. The only way that we can make progress in any of this is if we're willing to have reflective moments, which require those kinds of conversations that rub against our own personal bias, rub against and confront our confirmation bias, and ultimately bring in other perspectives that help us to, at the very least, even if we don't agree with it, sharpens our own deeper understanding of why we believe what it is that we believe, and help us to be able to have those conversations in the future. So in my mind, it's not about proving I'm right. I look at every conversation as an opportunity for me to be able to better understand and expose areas in my own thinking that I maybe didn't know were there, or I hadn't thought through before. And I need to spend more time searching resources out, or studying scripture, or going to scientific literature, or listening to stuff on YouTube that I wasn't aware of before. So.
Well, thank you guys very much for the Rick, I interrupted you. Go ahead, please.
No. I was just thank you. I appreciate you sharing.
We have a couple of questions from the audience. This one, the first one goes to the theists. So what are the theists' denominations?
I'll start, I guess. I'm currently Baptist.
I'm non-denominational, although I grew up in a very charismatic church, and I've since separated from that pretty intensely. It's a story there for another time. But and my degree is from Olivet Nazarene University. I'm not Nazarene, but I've got a pretty strong Wesleyan theological background. So.
Oh, I didn't know we were giving history too. So I grew up Catholic, went to Baptist, went non-denominational, went agnostic, and then came back to Baptist. And no degree at all at this current moment.
Greg?
I guess you call it non-denominational. It's sometimes called charismatic. I'm not exactly sure how it's labeled, but that's the
What
I
is
am
this?
technically.
This charismatic
What?
stuff? What is this? I'm sorry if that's something. I've never heard of that before.
Whole nother side of
sorry, that was- yeah,
Christianity.
that is really-
Pentecostal speaking in tongues.
Well, I mean,
You got
I-
Pentecostal,
that-
Word
that-
of Faith. You got all the preachers online that are
and
health,
that
wealth,
even
all that stuff. That's
depends on your ethnicity, because like you go to like a black area, it's going to be just Pentecostal or Church of God in Christ, or if you're in a predominantly white area, it's maybe referred to as charismatic, which is new for me. I'm just learning that tonight. 8 years old. Great. So even that it's the different denominations and explanations of things.
yeah.
I was
That's
raised
the-
Catholic, so
and that's
I don't
the-
know any of the Catholic seems to be very different from Christian.
There's a lot of differences.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of
girls,
similarities.
listen,
There's a lot of
right, yeah.
similarities. I
Yeah.
see, and here's the funny thing: when I start having conversations with Christians about politics, which happens on my podcast a lot, I'm so baffled at why they continue to advocate for this idea of advocating biblical morality in every law and every politics. I'm like, if we're creating a Christian theocracy, we can't agree, even as Christians, on what exactly this stuff means. So what exactly is the end game here? You
Right.
know? So, yeah.
And that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah. So
Okay, we have another question here.
did we lose Rick? What happened?
Oh,
Rick, you
no.
still there? Oh,
Might be fixing
Oh,
something.
I clicked the wrong
another
one. Here we
question,
go.
couple questions. Okay.
From the Sassy Heathen, do you think anyone has honestly changed their views from having an atheist-theist debate, or there been a clear winner or loser?
I was
Yeah, I can tell you, from my personal experience, just knowing that there is someone who speaks for the opposite side sometimes helps. I once had a person who just never knew what the atheist position was. I had them listen to a debate, and they said, I didn't know that other people actually reasoned through this and had good, intelligent arguments for both sides. So I don't know that debate was the one thing that switched them over, but at least that shows that people are still having these conversations and it's not completely set in stone. So I guess my answer would be, I don't know if it's the debate that did it or that ended it, but I've seen debates start the thought process.
I would say I agree that it seems like the debates, at least that you find online, are mostly between 2 and 3 hours long. And to me, it always seemed like they just never finished.
Right.
And so I think that it really is. It's a philosophical conversation. It's constantly ongoing. I don't think that they're ever going to hit an end point, but it was those debates that deconverted me, because I had been having conversations with plenty of people, but until I actually sat down and said, okay, I've never listened to atheists before. I don't know what they think or why. And so that's why I started listening. So I think it's helpful. I just think that it's done already.
And it's good that they're out there. There's a good archive of these. You can go back a decade and listen to a whole bunch of debates if you want to. Anybody else? What do you guys think about changing minds because of a debate?
I mean, you just heard it from her.
So
I'm pretty sure. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Craig.
I would have originally said no, but then when Jenna started saying that, I started realizing a lot of people who I've interviewed, even, their first exposure and why they deconverted had a lot to do with them seeing this debate here, and they got exposure to ideas that they weren't even necessarily sure didn't know were out there. So yeah, I mean, some of these debates actually do change minds, to a certain degree, or at least they affect the dialogue going forward.
But you're never going to know what's going to change another person's mind for or against. So that's something that's actually a pet peeve I just want to mention, is when people assume, oh, well, once you understand this point. No, you don't know that. You don't know my life.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Well,
Are there thoughts on debates?
I've
Craig,
seen
sorry,
it
I
happen both
interrupted. Go ahead.
ways.
What's that? What was that, Rick? Rick, I didn't hear what you said.
Well, yeah, I was saying I've actually seen it happen. I've seen it happen both ways. So I think it's, for me personally, I was actually convinced that agnostic was something of a potential interest from a debate, but I've also seen an atheist convert to Christianity from a debate. So I've seen it take place in both regards. I'm not one to necessarily engage, but I have I've witnessed it happening on both sides. So there's potential.
This is fun.
I'm on the fence about this one, but I'm gonna put this question on. I want to expand the question a little bit instead of about a specific person to be about a specific topic, though. The question on the table: have you ever had a conversation, debate with Darth Dawkins? And I'm going to expand this to being about any presuppositional apologist. And if so, what are your thoughts? Oh, and look, we lost Rick again. He was so fed up with this question.
He's like, "I'm done.
Yes,
we are out.
There is no room for the transcendental argument anywhere I am. I'm done." So, thoughts on the presuppositional argument?
Can I actually start on that?
Please.
So I was invited to do a debate, which I said I don't debate. I don't know how. I've never been taught. I talk with people. And I ended up having a conversation with a presuppositional apologist. And there became a point in the conversation where I was talked down to with all this like terminology that I clearly did not understand what any of it was. And so it kind of, I think that's really the point where we lost each other in a conversation. And I think that's pretty common is when there's like this, I guess it's the presupposition part. The whole, oh, well, you really know this, but you know, and they just kind of, they assume.
Right. Your worldview is incoherent without this. Like,
right.
Do I even need a coherent worldview? Like, what's...
Right. Exactly. So I'd say if they're an apologist, sure, talk to them, whatever. If they're a presuppositional apologist, I personally don't engage.
Yeah, I just for me, I just think it's bad television. We already know the argument. We already know that it's going to try to go into one of a certain number of channels. I have a presuppositional bingo card, and I can usually get a blackout just from the opening statement.
Puck, right? I want a copy of that.
They all sound pretty much the same. It's like, okay, let's see, knowledge is on there, or what is it? Oh, what is it? Necessary precondition for the rationality of the universe. There's a whole bingo card. It's just boring television. We know how it's going to go. We know where they're going to try to take it. I don't particularly care for engaging with it. But for anybody else who has had experience with presuppositional apologetics, please chime in.
I think I differentiate between the strategy that like Darth will use in a debate and the actual philosophical ideas I'm kind of interested in. I think they're more interested than they get credit for, because the strategy that Jenna is talking about, where they just try to shut you down, is innate, and it plays as, just like he said, it kind of plays as innate. And like when I saw Darth debating Shannon, it was like, you know, your worldview is incorrigible and it's incoherent and it makes no sense, and it's not really true. I mean, you don't have to be a Christian to. The idea that you need a philosophical justification for your worldview is kind of not really true. You know, I do the things I want and I do the things I need to do. And that's the philosophical justification. But the underlying argument itself is more interesting. It's just the debate strategy is stupid, because it's a script where you just try to get the person to, I'm not even sure what they're trying to accomplish.
They're trying to shut you down.
Has it ever worked? Like, does anyone go, you're right?
You know, that's like exactly why I'm okay with people continuing to do it. Like, I don't think the presuppositional argument has ever won anybody over to Christianity. So keep on doing it.
So Eric Murphy actually has been taking on a couple of people.
I would disagree with you on that, Puck. I would not want them to continue doing that.
So Eric Murphy actually has been doing a really good job of taking on some presuppositional apologists and having just really good conversations with them. And what I think that he does is, and I hope that he's okay with me speaking for him, but he kind of tries to call them out on stuff like that. I think that that's the only way to get through something like that.
You had a great chat with was it Eric Vila?
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking of.
Mm.
Is it Eric Vila or Tyler Vila?
Tyler, I'm sorry, I apologize. Tyler Vila.
Okay, so Tyler Vila was in a debate with Matt Dillahunty, and technically that's a presuppositionalist argument, and I thought his argumentation was actually fairly strong. But he wasn't doing the here, let me shut you down. He kind of was a little like I did analysis of it. But I thought it was one of the strongest arguments I'd ever seen in terms of philosophically from the apologist's point of view. It's just the presupposition part is where it fails. You have to start out believing this, or you won't see it. Well, you know, it's the presupposition. But there's aspects of it that are really interesting to me. It's hard to explain exactly what I mean.
I personally feel like anybody who's walking into a debate with an atheist with that kind of an approach is like, do you understand exactly what your role is as a Christian here? Because if they're not where you are right now,
Yeah.
how do you get them there? Because you're trying to just throw out at them, you're wrong. Everything you believe doesn't make sense, blah, 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 blah. It's insulting. It's absolutely condescending. It's like, okay, how much is this actually in line with what your call is as a Christian to meet them where they're at and help them to be more understanding of why you are starting there in the first place? You know what I mean? So, yeah, that would be my 2 or 3 cents on it.
We have one more question here that came in via text. And this was in regard to something, Dan, that you said earlier, and they're asking for more clarification.
Oh, boy.
Why does Dan/Christians disregard the Old Testament, or can they expand on what he meant about his Christianity only being wrapped in Jesus? I think this is when we were talking about areas in the Bible. Okay.
Definitely not discrediting the Old Testament at all. It's not about discrediting or dismissing the Old Testament in any way. It's about understanding exactly how the Old Testament connects with the New Testament and the purpose of it, because they are connected theologically. And there's a professor that I had when I was going through getting my master's degree, and he said something that I thought was always stuck with me as far as understanding how to connect the two as a pastor. If you are talking to any pastor who is preaching or teaching on the Old Testament and they do not know how that portion of Scripture connects with Jesus and the gospel, then they're not ready to teach that part of Scripture yet. Like, it's all, in my mind, it's all going back to Jesus. Whether it's talking about prophetic stuff or whether it's talking about, and analogies and ways that God would use stories and stuff in the Old Testament that he did that becomes metaphorically precursor to what Jesus did. Like, there's a lot of really cool connections across the two. And so it's not discrediting the Old Testament in any way. If anything, the New Testament is expanding on and giving a better understanding of what the Old Testament was really about and leading up to, if that makes sense.
Any other thoughts on top of that?
It doesn't make sense to me, but that's
well,
okay.
Like,
That's okay. That's okay. We can
one of the things that
continue
I
to ask
like,
questions and have conversations about it.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Do you, there's a channel called Dark Matter 2525, and they have like this 10-minute clip show. It's a cartoon of like this game show type thing where they're talking about, okay, this show, like, we're gonna ask you a question about something in the Bible, and it's like you answer, okay, like for one of them, it's like both yes and no were somehow the correct answer. So they were asking about specific numbers, and somehow two completely different, or more than that, were completely different numbers, and somehow they were all still the right answer. And coming from the atheist side, I have seen people say it's like, if there's one mistake in the Bible, there's, who's to say how many others are in there, and then, you can't rely on this. And I guess I've always taken the idea that just because one piece of information is wrong doesn't mean you throw out the whole thing immediately. You still have to evaluate everything point by point. And going along with what I think you guys were saying about being more like, who was it that said, I've never heard of people really having a problem with what Jesus teaches or wanting to be more like Jesus. Was that, I don't know if it was Rick or Dan or something like that. Yeah, and I think that's a great way to put it.
Don't accuse me of these things, Puck.
I apologize. Like, the minutiae is not nearly as important as the message. I get it.
Looking at the comments, Richard Graves actually made a really good, very 8 words or 9 words summation of exactly what I was trying to say. So anyway.
Read that if I can, because I need to step away here after this, but I wanted to jump in on this. I think, unfortunately, when you have that question, there are so many things in the Old Testament, right, that you can look at that just are almost irrelevant, but they play a part in the story or the storyline of how we got to where we are, right? It gives us a sense of history, but at the end of the day, I think we have to be careful about, and this is something that I engage with Christians when we have these conversations. You have a narrative that was created to fit a political stance, right? The way that the Bible has been arranged has been so that it is befitting for a particular societal type of existence, and books were removed from said Bible for that existence to flourish. So if when you start
or never included in the first place,
or were never included in the first place, right? So we have a lot of that you have to look into. I am no Bible scholar. There are Bible scholars that are here. Dr. Josh, thank you so much for being here. That could probably go a lot deeper into the historical context of things that were written, words that were used that aren't there in the translations that we currently have. When you get into the conversation of which book is irrelevant, you're setting yourself up for a debate that does need to be had. At the end of the day,
I agree with that.
What our responsibility here is Christianity, as Dan so eloquently put earlier, doing Christianity right. There's a love aspect that comes with that is our responsibility of living our lives for humanitarianism, if you will, and loving each other for that reason. But I do need to excuse myself, everyone. So
Rick, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Rick.
You can catch Rick on his other shows
Nice to meet
on
you.
YFNA News.
Nice meeting you, Rick.
Watch this show in black and white. I think it's on Fridays or Mondays.
Thursdays. It'll be tomorrow. We'll be talking about systemic racism. And please pray for me because, dear Lord, I have a lot of anger and rage about this conversation. But make sure you tune in at 7:30 tomorrow night. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much for letting me be here, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
All right, let's take one last. Thank you guys all very much for being here. Let's do one last lap. Shill your channels, shill your appearances. Dr. Josh, where can we find more of your work?
Yeah, we're on Digital Hammurabi, and actually some pretty exciting stuff happening. We have a scholarship program that we do for PhD students that are currently in the fields of ancient Near Eastern studies or Hebrew Bible, Egyptology. But we just received nonprofit status for our scholarship program, which is called HAPS, Humans Against Poor Scholarship. And we are starting a Black Scholars Matter scholarship program. So we are going to give, I think it's $1,000, my wife runs it, but $1,000 scholarships to African-American undergraduate students who are going to be juniors or seniors. And they are wanting to go into the fields of ancient Near Eastern studies or Egyptology. And the scholarship helps them get to one of the conferences in the U.S., so that they can meet scholars in the field, meet other students, PhD students in the field, begin to network so that we get diversity in academia. So digitalhammurabi.com, you can find the links there, but it's Humans Against Poor Scholarship. So if you can, go donate to it. It's, it's tax deductible now, so officially.
Nice.
Cool.
Jenna, where can we find more of you?
I have a channel on YouTube, and the channel is called Jenna Belk, but I have a show currently called Atheist Stasis, where I talk about, or I guess I learn online. And I'm on the Atheist Experience, usually once or twice a month on YouTube as well, on the ACA's channel at 4:30 Live, and a couple other things. But you can find a lot more about me on YouTube.
Thank you, Craig.
I have a YouTube channel called Craig Reed TCR, and a lot of what we were doing here on this channel, I do a lot of the same thing. I have long conversations with atheists that are really very similar to this, where we just go in depth about their deconversion, very non-defensive. And then I also put out individuals that I make that are more like me ranting and raving and going on tirades. They're a little bit different, but what we did here, I thought was actually really awesome, and we could do a lot of cross streams with my channel with this type of stuff because this is right up my alley, which I think you already knew, Puck, or Ethan, or both of you knew. I guess that's about it.
Yeah, thank you very much to Inquisitive Quandary for spamming the links in there. Go check out all these other channels.
There you go.
All right, and Dan, where can we find more of you?
Yeah, my podcast only has one season out, and because I'm a working dad of a toddler, it's only 7 episodes right now. But it's the Dear Christians podcast. Some of those topics that we tackle in season 1, we talk about God and guns and the relationship that Christianity and Christian culture has with gun culture in the United States. That's a pretty heated conversation. We talk about, I interview a guy who worked with and was heavily involved in a career in politics with the GOP, and about why he left the Republican Party because of his faith. And that was a good conversation. We talk about the market of Christian media and whether or not there's an ethical dilemma with making money off of Jesus. So lots of really, it's only 7 episodes, but I try to make sure that they're not a waste of your time. I've got season 2 interviews already being done. We talk about, we have one guest coming on that's discussing legalization of pot and marijuana and why it is that that's such a contentious issue, but alcohol for some people, not so much. And just really interesting conversation about that. Talk about politics being an idol within Christianity and having an unhealthy relationship with politics and faith.
Y'all are my kind of Christians.
Hey, honestly, that conversation in particular is almost like I'm going to a confessional, to be honest with you.
Oh, really?
I have, man, politics it sucks my life so much, and it's a problem for me, and I know it is. It's ruined a lot of relationships with Christians, ironically, not with as many non-Christians, but more with Christians. And then I've got another gentleman that actually was on last season, where we talked about mega churches versus smaller churches and like celebrity pastors and the problems that go along with that. That's what we talked about last season, but he's actually coming on next season to talk about race within Christianity and diversity and a lot of the challenges that are being faced and where the church's role is in bringing progress on a lot of this stuff. He's actually African-American. He's got a really crazy story about how he was very prejudiced against white people for most of his youth. And now he's pastoring a church of predominantly white people in rural Kansas. Wow. Like, really cool story. I'll let him share the story, cool. But those are kind of the things that we tackle on my show. Dear Christians podcast. It's on like every streaming service you could think of, Google, Apple, Spotify, whatever. And we're on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. So,
well, if you're on this channel, you definitely know where to find me and Ethan. This is the channel. I'm on
for hosting.
This is it. This is a great conversation, Puck. I love it.
I know Ethan hates it when I do this, but this sounds like something like we can continue. And the roundtables are like, I always try to get like one new face at least every single roundtable, right? Someone who's never been on before. Let's get some fresh voices in here. But it was a great time that I had with you guys. I want to take a moment to thank all of you for taking your time on Wednesday night instead of watching the finale of Survivor. You're here with us, and I appreciate that greatly.
Wait, a new episode still going?
No, it was like 3 weeks ago. But they just dropped a new episode of Hoarders, and I'm really excited to get over to it.
Now I know what I'm doing in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you very much to our especially to our patrons, and especially to our top tier patrons. We have Trina Deluca and Cynthia McDonald. Thank you very much for believing in this channel so much you decided to pay for it. We will be having another roundtable next week on Wednesday at 7:00 Central Time. So go ahead and check out the schedule on this channel and also the other channel, YFNA News, where you can find more Richard and more intelligent conversations between all sorts of crazy people about all sorts of crazy things. Dan, you can probably vouch for that, can't you?
Yeah, for sure.
And thanks, Ethan.
It was a genuine honor to get to talk to a lot of people who I've been watching for a long time. Finally get to talk to you for the first time. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks.
Sorry, Puck. Correction. Thank you to our top patron, Cindy PLAZA.
Cindy PLAZA. I apologize. Cindy PLAZA. By mistake. That's my mistake.
And he's gone.
Yeah, and he's gone.